Hi, welcome to my channel. In this video, we will talk about class method decorate. Right? So it's written like this, and we'll try to know what that is and why it is useful. Usually, we don't use class method decorated for our normal projects, but sometimes they're quite handy to have. Right? And we'll try to understand what's the use of this class method decorator. Right. So class method decorator, as it is highlighted in here on the screen, is used to create class methods. Right. Like you can have class attributes, like these are class attributes. You can have class methods as well. Right. What we can do, we can run this project, and you will see it works exactly same as your normal method, right? So although we haven't called that method, but even if you will call it, you will see the same results. You have created, you have a class, and in that class, what do you have? So you have a constructor, and then you have a normal method, right? And then you have a class method like this one using the class method decorator. Now what we're doing in the main method is basically we are creating the object of the class. The constructor takes true parameter, right? So we assuming that this is the year of birth, and this is the name of the person, right? And now what we're doing is we are printing the age of the person, right? So what we're doing is we're printing the age of the person. So inside our constructor, we are calculating the age of the person. So we are passing the year of the birth, and then using this method, we're getting the current year, and then we are subtracting the year of birth from that year, and that will calculate the age of the person, and we are printing that age in our main method. As you know that if we have created the object, using that object we can access the attribute of that class, and that's what we did. If we can get the attribute of the class, we can also get the methods of that class. And we know that we have a method called class method, okay, and we are trying to access it. Let's do that. See, it at the moment it looks like it's like a normal method, but actually it has slightly different use, and that's what we'll try to understand. As you can see, one difference between your class method decorator or a normal method is that here we're passing self and here we're passing cls. So what's the difference? This self is basically instance of the class, and this CLS is actually the object of the class. There's a slight difference between instance and object of a class. Object is basically a copy of a class, and instance is pointing to that object. It contains the memory address of that object, right? So instance contains, so we can have many instances of an object. Slight difference, I will explain it in another video, the difference between instance and uh, class object, right? So difference between in class instance and an object. So they're slightly different in Python. So here, so this is basically class object. So we're not writing it as a class. Why? Because class is already used by Python for another purpose. So this keyword is used by Python, so that's why we don't write it as class, we write it as CLS. And that is telling us that this is a class object. Now, next thing, okay, at the moment it looks like it's same as a normal method, but why basically do we use uh, class decorated uh, class method decorator to create methods in a class. You have seen that here when we are assigning a value to your age, we are basically processing the input and then assigning that value to this attribute age, right? Okay, we can let me tell you. So what we can do, we before we can use instead of processing this information here, right? We can process it in our class method as well, right? And then we can use this class method as an alternate constructor, and that's actually its main use. So what I'm saying is we can use class method to create a constructor. I will explain that. So right now what we have done, we have created the object of that class using the constructor. Now we will create the object of the class using this class method, and that's its use, right? And why it's better to use class method to create the object of the class, or in other words, to use class method as an alternate constructor? The reason is we want to keep the implementation of your constructor straightforward. We don't want to process, although we can do it using the constructor as well, but here we want to just keep it straightforward. We don't want to process the information before implementation, right? Before assigning the value. So using the constructor, we just want to do the simple, straightforward stuff. If you have to process the information before assigning it to attributes of the class, then ideally what we say we can use a class method, right? Let's do it. So now at the moment this class method is not taking any parameter. What we will do, we will say this class method would take two more parameters. One would be name and the other one would be here as our constructor, right? So now you can see the signature of this class method is matching to the signature of this constructor. The only difference is the constructor is taking self parameter and this class method is taking CLS or class, right? So this constructor is taking the instance of the class as parameter, and this class method is taking the object of the class as parameter. Now we will try to create the constructor. We will try to use this class method as alternate constructor. So let's do it. What we can do is we can do the same thing, right, that we were doing before. Look what we had before. Before this, we were trying to process the information before assigning that value to the attribute of the class, right? But now what we're saying, okay, so the constructor would have the straightforward implementation, but if we have to process the information before it's assigned to class uh, before it's assigned to class attributes, we will use this class method decorator, right? So let's do it. So now for this purpose, obviously we have to match the signature of our class method with our constructor. So if we want to use it as an alternate constructor, so now we will have two more parameter. One is name and the other one is here. Now next thing that we will do, we will say CLS. See, like we can access the attributes of your class using self. We can access the attributes of your class using this class objects as well. So I can say CLS dot name equal and name. then I can say cls dot age equal, and now we will process your age before we assign it to class attribute age, like we did it in your constructor before. But as I said, we will prefer doing the processing of the information using the alternate constructor or a class method decorator rather than inside the normal constructor, because in normal constructor we will have the straightforward implementation. See here, we're not processing any information, so we can say that this is a straightforward implementation, right? We're not doing any passing before assigning the value, right? So now what we can do, so now what we're doing is, so we have actually processed the information and then assigned it to that age attribute, and now what we can do, we can return it. We can say return and then cls, and in bracket we can return those basically attributes. So here, what we can do, so rather than saying cls dot name, you can just simply say name as well. Or because name is already defined, so you don't even need to basically so you don't need to even say that. So here we have age, right? So you don't even need to say that. Okay, so you need to assign the processing information to the class attribute when you're creating the object using this class method decorator. So normal name, any name would be okay actually, right? So we call it age, and then what we will do, we will return a name and age. Right, now inside a main method, what we're doing is we are uh, we are creating second object, right? And second object would be equals to, let's use your uh, my class, which is the name of the class, dot class method, to call that class method, right? And now it takes two parameters. Obviously we won't pass class cls, because cls is the object of the class which would be automatically passed, right, like yourself. So we would ignore that. We will pass the second and third value, right? Second one is name, right? So I can say John, and third one is the year of birth, and I can say that is, let's say, 2000, right? So now what will happen is it will calculate the age using this class method and assigned it to class attribute age, right? So we are in returning it. So the effect of this statement would be that it will assign the value of name and age to class attributes, right? So now what we can do, we can test it. So we can say print and obj, which is the name of the object. Let's name it slightly differently. The first object name was obj, and the second one is object one, right? We can say object one dot name, and then on second line what we can do, we can say obj one dot age. Let's test our program. We're getting an error, and the error is class method missing two required argument, name and the year. Right, so although we have passed these two values, and okay, my class dot method, is not here, and let's change it to cls dot, and here we will say cls dot and cls dot. Let's run it now. Two position arguments. Position argument. Okay, line number 29. Oh, here. Sorry, the problem was here. We already have that, so let's run it, and it will work. Right. So the problem that we had, so we didn't deleted the previous method actually, right? So we had the earlier implementation of your class method, and that class method wasn't taking any argument. So we forgot to delete it from the main method. Actually, we were calling it from the main method, right? So we have a different implementation of our class method now, and now we're using class method to we're using class method as an alternate constructor, as you can see here, right? So now, as I said, we don't need to use cls. All we need, we can ignore, we can get rid of this line. We are just returning any value from within our class method. Let's do it, and that would be assigned to our class attributes, right? As you can see here, so it's same as a constructor. So when we say return cls name age, so it is assigning name to name attribute of the class. You see here we have two attributes in a class. One is name, the other one is age. So name is assigned to name, and age is assigned to age attribute, right? Okay, another thing, why we use it, because we want to keep the implementation of a constructor straightforward, and if we need to process any information before it is assigned to the attribute of a class, we will use this class method for this purpose, right? As I said, we don't use it often because it's a good practice if you do it like this, but most of people, they don't prefer. So what they do is they process the information inside the constructor, right? So that's all for today. See you next video, and do subscribe to my channel. Bye.